Chapter 1. The City of Lights. Hiding a City of the Dead. The first true shock of Paris wasn't the beauty of the Eiffel Tower at night, or the dizzying scale of the Louvre. It was the smell of baking bread. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but that's what I was thinking about, sitting at a wobbly cast-iron table outside a café called Le Réconfort, a stone's throw from the lion statue at Place d'Enfer Rochereau. The air was thick with it, a warm, yeasty, profoundly human scent that wrapped around me like a promise. This was the Paris of postcards, of dreams. Students argued philosophy over tiny espresso cups. An old man in a beret meticulously arranged flowers in a bucket, and the morning sun gilded the elegant limestone facades of every building. I, Ilara Vance, graduate student, historian, and perpetual overthinker, was living inside a cliché, and I loved it. My laptop was open, displaying a digitized scan of a 1782 city ledger. My thesis, the official reason I'd been granted a 6-month research fellowship, was supposed to be a dry analysis of structural engineering challenges in pre-revolutionary Parisian urban expansion. Thrilling stuff. But the deeper I dug, the more the neat columns of numbers and official decrees began to feel like a lie, a cover story. Because for every record of limestone quarried or a new sewer line approved, there was another, more disturbing document, a complaint from a priest about the foul and pestilent air sickening his parishioners. A merchant's furious petition describing how the value of his property had collapsed because the basement of the building next door was, and I quote, leaking a black and putrid effluvium. My coffee suddenly tasted of acid. I looked up, from the screen, forcing myself to see the modern city. A woman laughed, a bright, carefree sound. A scooter buzzed past. The bread smell was still there, but now, in my mind, it was fighting a losing battle against a phantom odor I'd only read about, the stench of the cemetery of the innocents. My research had made it real for me. It wasn't just a historical fact, it was a visceral reality. By the late 1700s, the cemetery wasn't just full, it was a geological layer of death. Centuries of bodies, plague victims, paupers, generations of Parisians were piled into mass graves so shallow and overcrowded that the earth itself seemed to be made of bones. Grave diggers, their faces wrapped in vinegar-soaked rags, would use long poles to break down the swollen, partially decomposed corpses to make room for the newly arrived. The ground level of the cemetery had risen over 10 feet above the streets. Outside, a grotesque hill of the dead looming over the living, and then the rain. I'd read a first-hand account from a horrified resident describing how a storm would turn the cemetery into a swamp with things washing up against the walls of the houses that bordered it. The city wasn't just built near its dead, it was being slowly consumed by them. The final trigger was the wall. In the spring of 1780, the pressure from the saturated, corpse-filled ground became too much. A basement wall adjacent to Les Innocents gave way. I pictured it in horrifying detail, the family sitting down to a meal, the sudden crack of stone, and then a tidal wave of earth and bones and unspeakable decay crashing into their home. It wasn't just a structural failure. It was the past, violently breaking into the present. The city's solution was one of cold, brutal genius. The quarries, a network of tunnels and caverns riddling the bedrock beneath our feet, the very source of the stone that built the beautiful city above. They would empty the cemeteries, night by night, and relocate the dead into the darkness. A solemn midnight procession of black-draped wagons, bones, stripped of identity, becoming a geological feature. It was the ultimate act of urban tidying. But as I sat there in the sunlight, the cheerful sounds of the city in my ears, a conviction solidified in my gut. This wasn't just sanitation, it was concealment. They weren't just moving the dead, they were burying them a second time, deeper, where the living wouldn't have to think about them. The city of light wasn't just shining, it was actively hiding the darkness it was built upon. And I knew with a certainty that made my hands go cold that I needed to see what they had hidden down there in the dark. Chapter 2. Overflowing Graves and a Horrifying Solution. The archives of Paris are a different kind of catacomb. They are dry, not damp, dusty, not muddy. The silence is one of whispered pages and the soft thud of ancient books being closed, not the dripping of water. But the weight of the past is just as heavy, just as suffocating. I'd traded the café table for a heavy oak desk in the bowels of the Bibliothèque Nationale. The air smelled of decaying paper and old leather, a scent that felt like knowledge itself. My previous day's conviction had hardened into a focused, almost feverish need to understand the mechanics of the horror. It wasn't enough to know it happened. I needed to know how. I needed to see it. The ledger before me was an inventory of death. It was a dry, administrative document, but reading it felt like watching a nightmare through a keyhole. Column after column listed the parishes whose cemeteries were to be cleansed. The numbers were numbing. Les Innocents alone was estimated to hold over 2 million souls. 2 million. The number was too vast to comprehend, so my mind latched onto the specifics the ledger provided. The number of carts commissioned. Black, unmarked, their wood soaked, with the smell no amount of scrubbing could remove. The number of workers hired, their pay supplemented with a daily ration of strong wine, a feeble shield against the unspeakable work. I found a journal, its pages brittle and brown, attributed to a low-level clerk overseeing the operation. His handwriting was a frantic scrawl, as if his pen could barely keep up with his disgust. October 12, 1786, it began. The work at Saint Innocent commences. The first picks struck the earth this morning. The smell is indescribable. It is a taste in the back of the throat, a weight on the eyes. The men retch constantly, even through their rags. We uncovered the first fosse commune today, a common pit. The bodies are not skeletons, not yet. They are a tangled, seething mass of decay, cloth, and earth. The diggers must use hooks and poles to separate them. It is not burial, it is butchery. I had to stop reading. I looked around the quiet, sterile reading room. A man across from me coughed politely. The normality of it was jarring. I was sitting in a room of civilized people, reading about hell. The journal entries continued, each more bleak than the last. The clerk wrote of the logistical nightmare. The bones, once exhumed, couldn't just be dumped. They had to be transported across the city under cover of darkness to avoid public panic and the stench. He described the nightly processions, the slow, creaking wagons, the drivers silent and grim, the accompanying priests mumbling prayers for the dead whose rest was being so violently disturbed. Paris, the vibrant heart of the Enlightenment, was haunted every night by a ghost train of its own making. But it was the final entry that made my blood run cold. January 15th, 1787, the clerk wrote, his script now shaky and splattered with what I hoped was ink. The work is almost done. But today, something else. In the deepest section of the Innocents, we broke into an older chamber, one not on any of our plans. The soil was different, blacker, and the things we found, not just bones, crates, rotted almost to nothing, but of a strange design, and symbols carved into the bedrock beneath the bodies. The foreman, a superstitious brute, crossed himself and refused to let the men near. Monsieur Guillemot himself was summoned. He arrived within the hour, his face like stone. He dismissed all the workers, paid them triple for their silence, and ordered the chamber sealed. not with wood and earth, but with new brick and mortar, as if building a permanent wall. He called it a structural necessity. I held the lantern for the mason. As the last brick was set, I could have sworn I heard a sound, like a sigh from the earth itself. We left in silence. That part of the city's past is now buried twice over. Some secrets, it seems, are not meant to be moved. I sat back, my heart hammering against my ribs. Guillaume. The name of the chief engineer was everywhere in the official records, lauded as a pragmatic savior. But here he was, sealing away a part of the find, not for public health, for secrecy. The official solution was horrifying enough. The systematic, industrial-scale disinterment of millions. But now I knew it was also a veil. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to dig up the city's darkest corners and, under the pretext of sanitation, hide the evidence even deeper. They weren't just solving a problem, they were editing history. And I had just found the first typo. Chapter 3. The Midnight Procession of Bones. The words from the clerk's journal didn't leave me. They followed me out of the library's stale air, onto the sun-drenched streets, and back into my small apartment. A sound, like a sigh from the earth itself. It played on a loop in my mind. A ghost track underlying the sounds of modern Paris. Monsieur Guillaume's face, like stone, walling up a secret. It wasn't just historical curiosity anymore. It was a personal itch, a splinter under. My skin I couldn't leave alone. I couldn't sleep. The image of those black-draped wagons was too vivid, a film reel projected onto my ceiling. I needed to be near it. I needed to stand where it happened. That's how I found myself back at Place d'Enfer Rochereau long after midnight, drawn there by a compulsion I didn't fully understand. The city was different at this hour. The cheerful bustle was gone, replaced by the lonely sweep of a street cleaner's truck and the distant wail of a siren. The elegant facade of the Catacombs entrance was stark under the yellow glow of the streetlights. The inscription above the door, Arrête. C'est ici l'Empire de la Mort. No longer a tourist curiosity, but a severe, sober warning. I stood there, shivering slightly in the cool night air, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. I tried to picture the square not as it was, but as it must have been. No cars, cobblestones. The air thick with the promise of rain and the pervasive smell of a city without modern sanitation. And then, the sound. Not the hum of electricity, but the clop of horse hooves, the groan of wooden axles straining under a terrible weight. I closed my eyes, letting the modern sounds fade. I focused on the past, on the clerk's descriptions, the taste of wine on the driver's breaths to numb the horror, the muttered Latin of the priests, a fragile shield against the profanity of the task. And then something shifted. It wasn't a dream. I was wide awake, but the streetlight in front of me seemed to dim, its electric hum dying into silence. A cold wind, smelling of damp earth and something else, something old and biological, whipped down the street, making my eyes water. The sound of the siren was replaced by another sound, one that coiled from the far end of the square, the slow, rhythmic clip-clop of a single horse. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I could only watch. A wagon materialized from the darkness, not a solid thing, but a shimmering, half-seen phantom. It was black, its outline blurred, drawn by a single skeletal horse whose head hung low with exhaustion. Walking. Beside it were figures, not men, but shadows given form, their faces obscured by hoods and rags. There was no sound but the horse's hooves and the agonizing creak of the wagon's wheels. They moved with a slow, funereal pace, a procession of ghosts condemned to repeat their task for eternity. This was the vision, the echo I'd half hoped for. But it was all wrong. The clerk wrote of a procession with priests, of a solemn but official operation. This felt furtive, unholy. The phantom wagon stopped directly before the catacombs entrance. The shadowy figures moved to the back, their movements jerky and unnatural. They began to unload their cargo. I expected to see jumbles of bones, but the shapes they pulled from the wagon were different, heavier. They weren't dumping them. They were carrying them with a strange, reverent care toward the entrance. And then I saw him. A man stood apart from the workers, watching. He was solid where they were smoke, real where they were memory. He wore a long, dark coat of fine wool, not the rough-spun rags of the laborers. His face was in shadow, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze, the cold authority. This was no mere foreman. This was Guillermo. He didn't oversee the main stack of bones. His attention was fixed. On a single, long crate, two of the shadows wrestled from the wagon. It was too narrow for a body, too structured for loose bones. As they carried it toward a side door, a door that doesn't exist on the modern structure, Guillermo's head turned, and for a heart-stopping second, I swear his eyes, deep-set and piercing, looked directly at me. A jolt, like an electric shock, went through me. I gasped, stumbling back a step, my eyes flying open. The vision shattered. The streetlight buzzed overhead. A car honked in the distance. The square was empty, modern, and mundane. I was alone, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, my skin slick with a cold sweat. It was just my imagination. A stress-induced hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and an overactive mind. It had to be, but the smell of grave earth was still in my nose. And the image of that long crate and the man who guarded it was burned into my memory with the clarity of a photograph. The official procession was a lie, or at least it was only part of the truth. Something else was moved that night, something specific, something valuable, and Guillermo himself was there to ensure its secret burial. I knew then what I had to do. Academic curiosity was gone, replaced by a raw personal need for answers. The next morning, I would use every bit of my academic credentials. I would call in favors, plead, beg. I wasn't just going to see the public ossuary. I needed to go down into the real tunnels. I needed a guide. I needed to find that wall. Chapter 4. A Labyrinth Beneath Paris. The morning sun felt like a lie. It streamed through my window, painting cheerful patterns on the floor, but it couldn't touch the cold knot of anticipation and dread that had taken root in my stomach. Last night's vision, I refused to call it a hallucination, had left a permanent mark. The smell of wet stone and old decay seemed to have woven itself into my clothes, my hair. I moved through my morning routine on autopilot, making coffee I didn't taste, my mind replaying that single piercing glance from a man who had been dead for over 2 centuries. My hands were only slightly steady as I dialed the number for the Department of Underground Works. I used my full title, my university affiliation, the name of my prestigious fellowship, layering them like armor. I mentioned my thesis on subterranean urban infrastructure and its socio-historical impact. I sounded confident, academic, sane. I did not mention midnight visions of ghostly wagons. To my stunned relief, it worked. After being transferred twice and put on hold for an interminable 10 minutes, I was speaking to a secretary who, with a tone of profound bureaucratic boredom, informed me that a research permit could be arranged. A guide, a Monsieur Lefebvre, would be available the following afternoon. "He knows the restricted sections," she said, her voice flat. "Do not deviate from his path." The wait was agony. The next 24 hours were a blur of nervous energy. I tried to read, to prepare, but the words swam on the page. All I could see was the darkness of that entrance, the look in Guillermo's eyes. When I arrived the next day, Monsieur Lefebvre was already there, a man who seemed carved from the same stone as the tunnels he guarded. He was short, wiry, with a face a web of deep lines and eyes that held no warmth, only a weary knowledge. He gave my permit a cursory glance, his gaze lingering on me for a second too long, as if assessing my durability. "You are a historian," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't a question. Yes. "I'm studying the quarry consolidation works," I said, sticking to my script. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. "Everyone studies the bones. Few study the stone. Follow me. Do not touch the walls. Do not wander. If I say stop, you stop. If I say turn back, we turn back. The map is not complete. There are reasons for this." He led me not to the public entrance, but to a nondescript service door around the side, marked with a simple interdit. The sound of the key turning in the heavy lock was final, like a cell door closing. The transition was instantaneous. One step through the door and the world of light and sound vanished. We stood at the top of a narrow, spiraling stone staircase that plunged into absolute blackness. The air changed. It was cold, heavy, and damp, carrying a scent I now recognized. Ancient dust, wet mineral, and that faint, sweet-tinged odor of decay. It was the smell from my vision. "Welcome to the real empire," Lefebvre said flatly, switching on a powerful headlamp. I fumbled with my own, my fingers numb with cold and nerves. The descent was endless. Our footsteps echoed like gunshots in the profound silence, a silence so deep it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. The staircase opened into a low, rough-hewn tunnel. The ceiling was barely 6 inches above my head, a crushing weight of limestone and the entire city of Paris. I felt a primal claustrophobia tighten my chest. This wasn't a curated tourist path. This was a raw wound in the earth. Lefebvre moved with an unnerving certainty, his light beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate cryptic markings painted on the walls, arrows, numbers, names like Decour and 1743, carved by long-dead quarrymen. He pointed out the massive pillars of rock, the piliers tournées, that shored up the ceiling. "Without them, the streets above would swallow themselves," he muttered. "The city is a crust. We are in the belly." We walked for what felt like miles. The tunnel branched and branched again, a dizzying, three-dimensional maze. My sense of direction evaporated completely. Without Lefebvre, I would be lost in 10 minutes, my body never to be found. He told me stories in his low rumble, not to entertain, but to warn. Of cataphiles who partied in hidden chambers, of fools who ventured into unstable sections called fontes, where the ground could collapse into a pit without warning. Of the lost, always stories of the lost. We paused in a wider gallery where the ceiling arched higher. Lefebvre consulted a worn, laminated map, tracing a route with a grimy finger. "This way is newer. We take the older route, more direct." While he was distracted, my own light beam swept across the wall opposite. It was covered in the usual graffiti of centuries, names, dates, hearts, but then something else. A section of the wall was smoother, older, and there, carved with a precision that stood out against the rough, quarry marks was another symbol. It wasn't the eye. This was different. A vertical line with a downward-pointing arrow crossed by 3 horizontal bars. It was simple, stark, and felt incredibly ancient. It was a way marker, a sign. My breath hitched. I quickly fumbled for my phone, my heart hammering. The shutter. Sound seemed obscenely loud in the silence. I just managed to snap a picture before Lefebvre's light swung back toward me. "You found something, mademoiselle?" he asked, his voice neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "Just the age of it all," I stammered, shoving the phone back in my pocket. "It's astonishing." He held my gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching out. He knew I was lying. He just gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "The stones have many stories," he said quietly. "But some are not for the light. Come, the way is long." He turned and led on, deeper into the labyrinth. But the game had changed. He was no longer just my guide. He was my warden. And I had just been caught reading a book I wasn't supposed to know existed. Chapter 5. Symbols of Secret Societies. Back in my apartment, the familiar world felt like a thin veneer. The sound of traffic outside my window, the soft glow of my desk lamp. It all seemed flimsy, artificial. The realness was in the chill still deep in my bones, the grit of ancient limestone under my fingernails, and the image on my phone's screen. The symbol. It glowed there, a stark, white scar on the dark rock. A vertical line, an arrow pointing down into the earth, barred by 3 horizontal lines. It wasn't ornate or mystical like the eye. It was functional, a warning, a direction. It felt older, more primal. Seeing it in the clean light of my room was even more powerful than seeing it in the flicker of my headlamp. Down there, everything felt surreal. Up here, it was a fact. I poured a glass of wine, not for taste, but for something to hold on to, an anchor in the present. My hands were still trembling. Lefebvre knew. That last look he gave me wasn't curiosity. It was a confirmation. A silent acknowledgement that I had stumbled onto the secret he was paid to guard. The stones have many stories, but some are not for the light. I opened my laptop, the hum of its fan a welcome modern sound. I started with what I knew. Quarry marks. I sifted through databases of historical symbols, mason's marks, architectural notations. Nothing. This wasn't a mark of measurement or ownership. This was something else. Frustrated, I pivoted. Guillaume. The pragmatic engineer was the key. I dug past the official biographies, the dry accounts of his engineering triumphs. I needed the man, not the legend. I scoured digitized personal letters, meeting minutes from long-defunct guilds, the gossipy diaries of his contemporaries. And then, in the faded, spidery script of a society columnist from 1775, I found it. A passing mention of a soirée at the Hôtel de Soubise. Listed among the attendees of note was the intriguing Monsieur Guillaume, whose genius for structure is matched only by his deep fascination with the more arcane geometries. The writer noted he spent much of the evening in deep conversation with a man referred to only as a prominent philosopher from Austria, a known associate of a certain radical fraternity. My heart began to pound. It was a thread, gossamer thin but real. I fell down the rabbit hole. Pre-revolutionary Paris wasn't just a city of philosophers and kings. It was a petri dish for secret societies. The Freemasons were the public face, a club for enlightened men, but beneath them, like a network of roots, ran others, the Illuminati, seeking to topple monarchies through reason and conspiracy, the Thai Rosicrucians, chasing alchemical secrets and ancient wisdom. Their philosophies were a dangerous cocktail of science, magic, and rebellion, and they needed places to meet, places to hide their work from the eyes of the church and the crown. The pieces began to click together with an almost audible snap. The great bone transfer, the perfect city-wide distraction. Night after night, for years, the eyes of Paris were on the macabre spectacle of the dead being moved. No one would notice a few extra crates on those black wagons. No one would question the comings and goings of engineers at the quarry entrances in the dead of night. Guillaume wasn't just solving a public health crisis, he was using it. He was the grand architect of a different kind of project. The catacombs weren't just an ossuary, they were a sanctum, a vault. the perfect place to hide a library of forbidden knowledge, relics the church would burn, or artifacts of a power too dangerous for the world above. The bones were the ultimate camouflage, a wall of mortality behind which secrets could live forever. The symbol on my screen wasn't just a mark. It was a signpost. The arrow pointing down, not to more bones, to something else, to what Guillemot and his brothers had buried. I looked from my phone to the window at the illuminated cityscape. The city of light was a lie. It was a lid, a capstone on a deep, dark well of secrets, and I was no longer a historian writing a thesis. I was an intruder. I had read the signpost. I knew the way. And the keeper of the gate, Monsieur Lefebvre, knew that I knew. The thrill of discovery was instantly frozen by a spike of pure, undiluted fear. I was no longer just exploring the past. I was trespassing in it. Chapter 6. The Revolution's Underground. Hideout. The fear was a live wire in my chest, humming alongside the thrill. Guillemot was no longer a historical figure in a book. He was a conspirator, a ghost with a cold, piercing gaze who had seen me from across centuries. And Lefebvre was his sentinel. I spent a sleepless night jumping at every sound from the street below, half expecting a knock on my door, a quiet word from university officials revoking my access, my fellowship, my sanity. But the morning came, and no one came for me. The world continued, blissfully ignorant. The silence from Lefebvre and the authorities was more unnerving than a confrontation would have been. It felt like being watched, studied. I was a mouse that had stumbled into a maze, and the cat was deciding when to pounce. I couldn't go back down there. Not yet. Not without understanding more. If the catacombs were a sanctuary for secrets, then the greatest upheaval in Parisian history, the Revolution, must have left its mark. The Revolution didn't just happen on the streets, it would have happened in the shadows beneath them. I went back to the archives, but my research had a new, frantic focus. I wasn't looking for engineering reports anymore. I was looking for whispers, for ghosts. I combed through police reports from the Reign of Terror, through the paranoid memos of Robespierre's committees, through the desperate letters of aristocrats hiding in attics. I was looking for any hint of the world below. And then, in a box of uncatalogued debris from a raised building near the Place de la Concorde, I found her. Her name was Celia de Montaigne. She was the wife of a minor noble, a man who had lost his head to the national razor in the spring of 1794. Her diary was small, the pages foxed and water-stained, her handwriting an elegant, frantic scramble of fear and determination. Most of it was the stuff of countless other diaries from that time. Fear of the mob, coded messages, the heartache of loss. But one entry, dated just a week after her husband's execution, was different. October 22nd, 1794. The nightmares are constant. I see his face. I hear the crowd. They came for the Dupré last night. Their screams. I cannot stay here. I am a marked thing in this house. Jean, the footman, the only one who stayed. He says he knows a way. A place they cannot find us. He says there are others down there, loyalists, those who remember the world before the madness. He says the entrance is through the old charnel house behind a wall that moves. He calls it the Rat King's Court. We go tonight. God protect us. The very thought of descending into that place of bones fills me with a dread that near stops my heart. But the dread above is worse. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the fragile pages down. The Rat King's Court. The name was grotesque, childish, terrifying. I devoured the rest of the diary. The entries became sparse, written in a different ink, by a candle that must have guttered in the damp. October 25th. We are below. The air is cold and tastes of earth and old death. The silence is absolute, broken only by the drip of water and the scuttling of things. But there are people here. Perhaps 50. They huddle in chambers lined with bones, their faces pale and drawn in the candlelight. They speak in whispers. There is a priest who says Mass each morning before a makeshift altar of skulls. The irony is not lost on me, worshipping the god of life in a city of the dead. There are tunnels that branch endlessly. Some are safe. Some, they say, are not. Jean warns me never to wander. He says the Federés, the revolutionaries, they use the tunnels too for moving troops and supplies unseen. Our hiding place is also theirs. We are mice hiding in the walls of the cat. The Chaisa diary ended abruptly a few weeks later. The final entry was a single stark sentence, the ink blotted as if by a tear or a drop of water. They are digging again, not to expand, but to hide something. Something they brought down in a crate, swathed in black cloth. They took it to the deepest tunnel, the one that smells of still water and old iron. The men who carried it did not look like soldiers. They looked like scholars. Their fear was a sharper thing than ours. I sat back, the silence of the reading room roaring in my ears. Celia de Montaigne's fear was my fear. Her hiding place was my obsession. The revolution hadn't just hidden people in the catacombs. It had hidden its own secrets. The revolutionaries and the loyalists, living in a desperate, silent stalemate in the dark, both aware of a third, more secretive group. The scholars. The inheritors of Guillaume's work. The crate, swathed in black cloth. It echoed the crate from my vision, the one Guillaume himself had overseen. They were still hiding things down there, even as the world above burned. The catacombs weren't. A static tomb. They were a living, breathing secret, a crossroad for every shadow that had ever fallen over Paris. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that the Rat King's court was real. And it wasn't just a historical footnote. If Celia's footmen knew about it, then others did too. Lefebvre knew. The knowledge had been passed down. A secret history whispered from one keeper of the dark to the next. I had to find it. It was no longer about a thesis. It was about following the trail of a terrified woman's words. It was about finding the crate. Chapter 7. Nazis in the Catacombs. Celia's diary left me with the taste of grave dust in my mouth. Her fear was a contagion, and I'd caught it. The image of her huddled in a bone-lined chamber, listening to the scuttle of rats and the distant, terrifying sounds of revolutionaries moving through the dark, wouldn't leave me. Her story ended in the dark, and a part of me was down there, with her, forever trapped in that cold silence. I tried to return to normalcy. I went to a different cafe. I called my parents and told them everything was wonderful. The research was going great. I lied with a smoothness that scared me. But my mind was in the tunnels. It kept tracing the path Celia described, trying to map her terror onto the fragmented charts I'd seen. The logical part of my brain argued that the secret died with her, that the Rat King's court was lost, its entrance sealed by time and collapse. But the part of me that had seen Guillaume's eyes knew better. Secrets in Paris didn't die. They just changed hands. I found myself in a different archive, this one specializing in 20th century military history. I told myself it was a distraction, a way to break the morbid cycle of revolutionary terror. But my feet carried me to the section on the Nazi occupation of Paris. I pulled a file at random, a stack of memos from the German Engineering Corps tasked with fortifying the city. It was dry, technical stuff. Assessments of sewer lines, analyses of bedrock stability for bunker construction. My eyes glazed over until I hit a memo from Standartenführer Ernst Junger, dated June 14, 1941. The subject line was Nutzung der unterirdischen Steinbrüche, utilization of the underground quarries. My blood went cold. I started reading. My German rusty but sufficient. The network presents a significant strategic opportunity and a notable security risk. While the consolidation work of the 18th century is structurally sound in the main corridors, our surveys indicate vast sections, remain unmapped and unstable. Initial exploration teams have reported several anomalies. The next paragraph was redacted with thick black ink. A single line remained visible below it. Contraband from the previous regime has been located and secured under Item 731 Protocol. Item 731. The number meant nothing to me, but the phrase previous regime did. The Nazis were meticulous record keepers. They wouldn't refer to the French Revolution that way. They meant the Third Republic, the government they had just toppled. The French had been hiding things down there, too, right before the fall. Kept digging, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I found an after-action report from a French resistance cell, the Francs-Tireurs, dated 1943. It detailed a failed operation to mine a German communications bunker built into a catacomb gallery. The mission was a disaster. The team got lost, separated. The lone survivors' debriefing was haunting. We heard them before we saw them. Not patrols. Their boots made a different sound, a methodical scraping sound. They were not checking for us. They were digging. We hid in a side tunnel, watched them pass. They were SS, not engineers. Their uniforms were clean. They carried no digging tools, but they were followed by men in lab coats, civilians, who pushed a cart. On the cart was a device. It was metal, with glass dials that glowed with a faint green light. It looked medical or scientific. They took it down the southern fork, the one that's marked on no map, the one that smells of sulfur. Henri followed them. He said he had to know. He never came back. We heard a sound hours later, not a gunshot, a hum. A low, vibrating hum that made the bones in the walls rattle. Then silence. We ran. I pushed the file away, my skin crawling. The Nazis. They hadn't just used the catacombs for bunkers. They'd found something. Something the French had hidden, and they'd brought in their own scientists to study it. Item 731. A humming device that made bones rattle. The timeline was collapsing. The catacombs weren't layered by century. They were a palimpsest of darkness, each era scratching its own horror over the last. Guillemot's secrets, the revolutions, hidden crate, the Third Republic's contraband, the Nazis' mysterious device. They were all down there, layered on top of each other, a geological record of fear and power, and the common thread wasn't a what, it was a who, the keepers, the ones who knew the ways. Guillemot had his order, the revolution had its scholars. The resistance fighter mentioned the unmapped southern fork that smells of sulfur. Celia's diary mentioned a deep tunnel that smelled of still water and old iron. It was the same place. It had to be. The knowledge hadn't been lost. It had been passed down, a cursed inheritance from protector to protector. The Nazis had somehow uncovered a piece of it. And that meant someone today still knew. Someone was still keeping the gate. I thought of Lefebvre's weary, knowing eyes. His warning that the maps were incomplete for a reason. He wasn't just a city employee. He was the latest sentinel, the current keeper of the Rat King's court. The fear I felt now was different. It wasn't a fear of ghosts or history. It was a fear of the living. I was no longer chasing a secret. I was chasing a man, and I had a terrible feeling he was waiting for me. Chapter 8. The Vanishing Explorers. The thought of Lefebvre was a cold stone in my gut. He was no longer just a guide. He was a warden, a descendant of a long, unbroken line of silent sentinels. And I had blatantly trespassed. The fear of the past, the revolutionaries, the Nazis, was a diffuse historical dread. The fear of him was immediate and sharp. I stayed in my apartment for 2 days, jumping at every footstep in the hall, my phone feeling like a live wire. I expected a call from the university, a quiet, professional voice informing me my research permit had been revoked due to safety concerns. The call never came. The silence was worse. It felt like the pause before a predator springs. I couldn't sit still anymore. The need to understand, to arm myself with knowledge, was a physical ache. If Lefebvre was the latest keeper, I needed to know what happened to those who challenged the keepers. My research turned dark, obsessive. I stopped looking for official histories and began scouring forums, obscure urban exploration blogs, the digital whispers of the cataphile community. The world of the cataphiles was a shadowy mirror of the official one. They had their own maps, their own names for chambers and tunnels, a culture built on bravado and secrecy, and they had their own ghost stories. I found a thread on a message board buried deep in the darker corners of the internet. The title was simple, The Lost. The posts were a litany of disappearances, most of them dismissed as drunk tourists or reckless amateurs getting lost in the endless maze. But a pattern emerged, a pattern that made the food in my mouth taste like ash. There was the story of Luke, a photographer who in 2007 was obsessed with finding what he called the Nazi laboratory. His last transmission, posted to his blog, was a blurry photo of a rusted metal door set into a wall of bones. The caption read, "Found it. The smell of sulfur is real. The humming. Can you hear it?" He was never seen again. The official report said he likely fell into a fontis, a collapse pit. Then there was Chloe, a history student like me from a decade ago. Her research was on Revolutionary-era hidden societies. Her last journal entry, described by a friend on the forum, mentioned a breakthrough. She'd found a reference to a court in a private letter. She'd bragged about having a source, a grumpy old guide who knew more than he let on. She went down for a private tour and never came back. The official story was carbon monoxide poisoning. The most recent was a pair of brothers, avid cataphiles, in 2019. They were experts, the kind who spent weeks below. They were searching for a legendary chamber rumored to hold pre-revolutionary artifacts. Their last known coordinates, pulled from a garbled GPS signal, were in a sector that wasn't on any map, official or otherwise. The one who'd started the thread, a friend of theirs, wrote a sentence that made my blood freeze. They knew the risks, but their last message wasn't about getting lost. It was a voice note. They were whispering. They said they'd found a modern wall, brick and fresh mortar, right where the old tunnel should be. They said someone had recently sealed it, and then they heard a sound behind them. Not a rockfall. A footstep. The recording just cuts off. The thread ended there. No follow-up. No resolution. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. It wasn't accidents. It wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern. A purge. Anyone who got too close, who found the wrong tunnel, who saw the wrong thing, vanished. And the official stories were all so neat, so plausible. Lost, fell, poisoned. Lefebvre wasn't just a guide. He was a custodian, a cleaner. His job was to lead curious academics like me on safe, boring routes and to ensure the truly curious never came back. He had asked me what I was studying. I'd told him quarry consolidation. But I'd taken a picture of a symbol. I'd shown my true interest. He was testing me. My permit wasn't revoked because he was giving me enough rope to hang myself. He was waiting to see if I would be smart, if I would get scared and run back to the world of light and my dry thesis, or if I would follow the trail of the lost. The realization should have terrified me into silence. It should have made me pack my bags and book the next flight home. But it did the opposite. A cold, clear fury washed over me, burning away the fear. Chloe, the history student, she was just like me. She had asked the wrong questions and she was erased. Her story was covered up with a convenient lie. I couldn't let that be my story. I wouldn't be another name on a cataphile forum, another tragic cautionary tale. Lefebvre and the keepers of the secret thought they owned the truth. They thought they could bury it, along with anyone who went looking for it. They were wrong. I opened a new search. I wasn't looking for history anymore. I was looking for tools. High-resolution topographic surveys of Paris, ground-penetrating radar reports, anything that could see through the official lies and the layers of stone. If they were hiding something, I would find it from up here in the light. I wouldn't give Lefebvre the chance to lead me to a dead end. The game had changed again. It was no longer a search for the past. It was a battle for it. And I had just declared war. Chapter 9. Forbidden Tunnels. No map can explain. The cold fury was a shield. It kept the image of Chloe, the lost history student, at bay. It muffled the phantom echo of that single cutting footstep on the cataphile's recording. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a detective. Lefebvre and his silent order thought their domain was the darkness. Mine was the light. Mine was data. I became a ghost in the city's digital infrastructure. I used my university's credentials to access geological survey databases, municipal planning archives, even declassified satellite imagery from the Cold War. I wasn't looking for tunnels. I was looking for inconsistencies. I was looking for the lie in the map. The official maps of the catacombs were a joke. They were beautiful, intricate things, but they were like a tourist's guide to Paris that only showed the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, pretending the rest of the city didn't exist. I layered them over seismic survey charts, over utility lines, over bedrock density scans, and I found it. It was a void. A pocket of nothingness deep beneath the 5th arrondissement, far from the tourist trails, in a sector marked on all official documents as solid, unexcavated bedrock. According to every map sanctioned by the city, it didn't exist. But according to the subterranean topography, it was there. A cavern, roughly the size of a tennis court, with what appeared to be a single man-made tunnel leading to it. A tunnel that began in the heart of the ossuary and went nowhere. It was a tunnel that shouldn't exist, leading to a room that couldn't exist. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The Rat King's court, Celia's sanctuary, the source of the Nazis' humming. It was real, but how to get there? The entrance wasn't on any map. I thought of Celia's words. The entrance is through the old charnel house, behind a wall that moves. I cross-referenced my void with the oldest architectural plans I could find, blueprints from the initial quarry consolidation. And there, in E, a faded, spidery diagram of the supporting walls near the Saint Michel sector was an anomaly. A wall was drawn thicker than the others, and next to it, a tiny, almost invisible notation in Guillaumeau's own precise hand. Contrefort renforcé, mécanisme interne. Reinforced buttress, internal mechanism. He'd written it down. The arrogant, brilliant bastard. He'd built a secret door and put its existence on an official blueprint, knowing no one would ever understand what they were looking at. It was a joke only he could appreciate. I had it. The location. The mechanism. I could picture it. A section. Of wall, seemingly solid but with a hidden counterweight, a pivoting stone. The way in. The triumph was immediately frozen by a primal, gut-wrenching terror. This wasn't a historical discovery anymore. This was a burglary plan. To go down there alone, to find that specific wall, to try and trigger a 250-year-old mechanism, it was suicide. The cataphiles who vanished were experts, and they'd had partners. I had a laptop and a death wish. I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. And there was only one person in the world who wouldn't think I was insane. I called my older brother, Ben. He was an engineer in Colorado, a rock climber, a guy who solved practical problems with his hands. The satellite connection crackled. Ilara? You okay? It's like 4 a.m. here. Ben, I need you to listen and not ask questions until I'm done. My voice was tight, breathless. I told him everything. The research, The visions, the ledger, Celia, the Nazis, the vanished explorers, Lefebvre. I told him about the seismic void and Guillaume's notation on the blueprint. I expected him to laugh, to tell me to get some sleep. There was a long silence. I could hear the wind howling over the Rockies on his end. "Send me the coordinates and the blueprint," he said, his voice utterly serious, all sleepiness gone. "I'll get on a plane tonight." "Ben, you don't have to—" "Ilara," he cut me off, his voice soft but firm. "You just told me a secret society of grave robbers has been murdering people for 200 years to protect a magic humming hole in the ground, and that the current caretaker is probably watching your apartment." "Yeah, I'm coming. Send me the files. I'll figure out the mechanism." The line went dead. I sat there, the phone clutched in my hand, tears of relief and terror welling in my eyes. I wasn't alone, but the relief was short-lived. As I prepared the files to send, a notification popped up on my screen, a security alert from my university cloud account. Unusual login attempt detected from an unrecognized device. Location, Paris, France. It wasn't me. Someone was in my files. They knew what I knew. I slammed my laptop shut, my blood turning to ice. Lefebvre. He wasn't a lonely old man in a tunnel. He had resources. He had reach. The battle for the past was over. The war for the present had just begun, and they knew where I lived. Chapter 10. The eternal mystery beneath Paris. The security alert was a gunshot in the silence of my apartment. They weren't just watching me from the shadows anymore. They were in my house, in my mind. Every byte of data I'd painstakingly gathered, every paranoid theory, every damning coordinate, it was all compromised. The feeling was one of profound violation, a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the Parisian night. I didn't sleep. I packed a go-bag with a flashlight, a multi-tool, power banks, and a printed copy of the crucial blueprint, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it shut. I spent the night curled in a corner of my bedroom, listening for footsteps on the stairwell, for the tumble of a lock being picked. The modern world had evaporated. I was back in Celia's time, hiding from the knock at the door. Ben's text came at dawn. Landed. Have tools. Where do you want to meet? The thought of meeting him anywhere near my apartment or the official catacombs entrance felt like leading a lamb to slaughter. Lefebvre would be expecting that. I gave him the address of a noisy, crowded brasserie across the Seine, a place where we could lose ourselves in the morning rush. Seeing his familiar, broad-shouldered frame push through the door was like seeing a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with a practical calm I desperately envied. He slid into the booth opposite me, dropping a heavy canvas duffel at his feet. "Talk to me, Ilara," he said, his voice low. "No hello. No small talk." I did. I showed him the security alert. His face hardened. He listened, nodding slowly as I laid out the void, the blueprint, the stories of the lost. "Okay," he said when I finished. He unzipped the duffel just enough for me to see inside. It wasn't just tools. There was a compact crowbar, a powerful-looking cordless drill, a small acetylene torch. "I'm not here for a tour. I'm here to get you in and out. Where's the door?" This was it, the point of no return. My academic curiosity had led me to a precipice, and now I was asking my brother to jump into the abyss with me. The weight of it was crushing. We didn't go through the official entrance. Ben, with a rock climber's eye for the city's anatomy, had found another way. An old, neglected service tunnel for the RER train line, its gate rusted shut. He made short, quiet work of the padlock with a pair of bolt cutters from his bag. The sound of the metal snapping was horrifyingly loud in the quiet morning. We descended into a different kind of darkness, a modern, grimy underworld of dripping pipes and the distant rumble of trains. Using my phone's GPS and his own downloaded maps, we navigated through utility tunnels and forgotten passageways until we broke through into the older, colder air of the quarries. We were behind the official map, in the unmapped margins. The journey was a silent, heart-pounding nightmare. Every drip of water was a footstep. Every shift of gravel was a breath behind us. Ben led the way, his headlamp a steady beam, his movements sure and silent. My own light danced erratically, betraying my terror. And then, we found it. The wall. From the blueprint. It was exactly as Guillermo had drawn it. Thicker. Set at a slightly different angle than the others, its surface a tapestry of ancient quarry marks and calcified deposits. It looked utterly, imposingly solid. Ben ran his hands over the stone, his touch surprisingly gentle. He found it almost immediately. A single, slightly looser stone at knee level, disguised amidst the others. Counterweight, he muttered. He pressed it. Nothing happened. He pushed, then pulled. He took a small pry bar from his bag, inserted the tip into a hairline crack, and applied a precise, measured pressure. With a deep, grinding groan that sounded like the earth itself waking up, a section of the wall, a slab 2 feet wide and 6 feet high, pivoted inward. A wave of air rushed out. It didn't smell of dust or decay. It smelled of ozone, of a storm, of something electric and alive. Ben looked at me, his face pale in the light. "You sure?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He shone his light. Inside. The beam illuminated a narrow staircase carved directly into the bedrock, descending into a blackness so absolute it seemed to swallow the light. The hum was faint, but unmistakable. A low, sub-audible vibration that I felt in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. We descended. The stairs ended in a cavern, the Rat King's court. It was not a chamber of bones. The walls were smooth, fused glass-like stone, and in the center of the room stood the source of the hum. It was not a Nazi device, not a revolutionary crate. It was a monolith, a spire of obsidian black rock roughly 8 feet tall that seemed to drink the light from our headlamps. It was covered in intricate spiraling patterns that were neither carved nor natural. They looked grown, crystalline. It hummed with a low, powerful energy that made the air shimmer. This was the secret. Not a treasure, not a weapon. A thing. An eternal mystery. We didn't speak. We couldn't. We just stood there, tiny and insignificant before this presence. A sound echoed from the staircase behind us, a single, clean footstep on the stone. We spun around. Monsieur Lefebvre stood at the entrance to the chamber. He wasn't holding a weapon. He just stood there, his face etched with a profound, weary sadness. He looked at the monolith, then at us. "You found it," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried through the hum. "Now you understand." "Understand what?" I managed to choke out. "Why it must remain hidden," he said. "It is not for us. It is not a tool. It is a mirror. It shows a nation its true heart. Guillermo saw ambition. The revolution. Saw blood. The Nazis saw power. It amplifies what we bring to it. It is a danger we cannot risk." He didn't move to stop us. He simply stepped aside. "Go, now, and never speak of this. You have seen the truth. The weight of it is your burden now. Guard it or unleash it. The choice is yours." We stumbled back up the stairs out of the chamber through the labyrinth into the shocking brightness of the Parisian day. We didn't talk. We just walked side by side, forever changed. I never wrote my thesis. I withdrew from the fellowship. Ben flew home, and we never discussed it again. Some truths are too immense to speak aloud. Lefebvre was right. The mystery wasn't what was buried down there. It was us, our darkness, our light, our endless capacity for secrets. The empire of death doesn't hold Paris's dead. It holds its soul, and I am its newest, most terrified keeper.